So look, this is, and look, thank you all for your perseverance and being here for this last leg of the journey for day one. I really want to acknowledge it. It's been a long day. But look, our kaupapa here for this fourth panel of the day is looking at Indigenous perspectives on the CPTPP review. And this panel discussion really is to explore what Māori and Indigenous entities engaged in the trade space are up to. So look, I'm going to hand it over to the panellists and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and what capacity that they've come here in, and then we'll get into the formal part of the questioning.
Kia ora tātai. I never thought I'd be in the lecture theatre this time of the night. Usually leaning on the bar somewhere. Mihi kia koutou mō koutou manu nui. No te ti, no te tā, wiwi wawa. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Tika tonu tautoko te mihi o reno ki te āhurewa tapu o te kingitanga. Po te tau te whero. Tāwhio, mahuta, rata, kuruki, tātarangi, kāhui, tūheitia. Tēnei te mihi ki te haukanga. Mai te haukanga o Mahina Rangi, o Ngāti Kaunganu. Tēnei te miharo kia noho mai o angani a koutou. Look, I shouldn't be here. I left school in the fifth form and went to the freezing works. And from the freezing works, went to the orchards and then shearing contractor, forestry contractor, fencing contractor. Apple picker of renown, but one of my best jobs was lambtailing, cutting lambtails off and giving to the whānau. But my passion is about whakapapa, and so I follow the whakapapa. So when I was growing up, all you hear on the marae is whakapapa and connection. When you're around the hangi pit, you hear about whakapapa at a local level. When you're hanging around the paipai, you hear whakapapa at a national level. So I wanted to explore this connection of whakapapa. And people would yell at each other on the paipai, they'd yell at each other on the hangi pit, but at the end of the day, they all got on. And then our estate, when we look beyond Aotearoa, because I was brought up at a marae called Waipatu, and even though we're only 2 k's from the centre of Hastings, I was brought up in a total Māori environment. The only Pākehā I saw were the doctor, the nurse and the Sunday school teacher. So it's very much Māori. And I wanted to know our parents and our uncles, without any vehicles or anything, how they knew every blinking Māori in the country. And so our local hapu was Hāwe. And then we said, this is where it all begins and ends. No, we're part of Whatuiapiti from Tāngoio to Takapau. Oh, suddenly we own half of Hawke's Bay. No, we're part of Kaungana. It goes from Wairoa to Wairarapa. Gee, we own half the East Coast. No, we're part of Takitimu. It goes from Ngāti Kāhui, Tauranga, right down the East Coast, all of the South Island. Now we own half New Zealand. Then we go to Rarotonga and they say, no, we're Takitimu. And you come from Tahiti, Samoa, Hawaii, Fiji and Tonga. So now I own half the Southern Hemisphere. So I was wondering how this whakapapa connection worked.
Now I know why you're such a regular visitor to Rikohu now.
How did this connection work? And then you go further back, when you're in Fiji, they say, no, you're from Vanuatu. Vanuatu, if you transliterate to Māori, it's Whenuatu. It's like a mountain, Whenuatu. And then the Vanuatuans say, no, you're from the Solomons. And they say, no, you're from Papua. So you follow your way all the way back. And they say we're part of the Austronesia. Where's Austronesia start? Well, it starts in China. Taiwan, we call it Te Whare Wānanga. And it comes down Vietnam, Vietnam. And we have names for these places all the time. So we're Austronesian. We went into Melanesia and Indonesia. Some of us went through Micronesia. And then we end up in Polynesia. And sometimes we get amnesia about where we come from. We think we just appeared in Aotearoa out of the sky, from the gods. And then you trace it back and you said, why did they come all this way 5,000, 7,000 years ago, and we still know each other. And it came back because we were trading from island to island. We transformed landscapes, we transformed flora and fauna, we transformed people, we moved people from island to island to island to island. So trade at that time was an inherent part of our culture. And that's what I'm doing in this space. Following the whakapapa, wanting to reintroduce those ancient trade routes back into the Pacific, back through to Asia, and then Kay Marie and a few of us, we were in Dubai last year, and the Arabs, especially the Egyptians, have a memory of Maui, and Maui left the hongi up there. So with all these ancient trade routes, today we heard about incremental development. We've been developing for 5,000, 7,000 years. And we've got to keep that development going, but we've got to recapture our mojo in that trade space, because our people didn't come sailing down here because they like doing karakia te Tangaroa and Tawhiri Mātia. They were trading too. And we've got to recapture that mojo in our tikanga. It's not foreign. We're trading from Madagascar to Malibu, from Egypt to Ekatahuna, all that time ago. And we've got to recreate our own space in that trade space, not rely on government and governments and FTAs to do it for us. We have the soft power called whakapapa and connection that we just need to reignite, and we create our own trading nation, our own trading opportunities. Tēnā tātou.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ngahiwi Tomoana, the Prince of Kahungunu. I got a little bit worried as he was going around, and then we went there and we claimed there, and I thought to myself, well, at least he stayed away from the west coast on my side of the island, but he certainly claimed Ngāti Porou. I'm going to go over there to the other end of our panellists there.
You still got our tuki.
That's true.
Oh my, all right.
Chris?
Just introducing.
Go.
Just like Ngahiwi introduced himself.
Nā ka tira, kia ora no tātou. Koi tēnei i hara mai i te tū kōrero atu ki au koutou. Tēnei hoki no Ngahiwi o te waiariki mai te tairāwhiti no te whānau apanui. Tuatahi, huri noa ki tēnā taha o te rau kumara ki Higurangi, ki tēnei taha o te whakatōhea. Like Ngahiwi, what I do, my day job, is I'm the chair of 4 of our Māori land trusts on the coast. I run a number of Māori businesses. I'm the chair, proudly, of the Kotahi Māori Research Institute here at the University of Waikato. I am also the chair of Te Taumata that leads Māori interest into all of the free trade negotiations between New Zealand and the rest of the world. I might just leave it at that and come back to the primary question after this. Pahia, kei a koe.
Kāhui.
Oh, kia ora. I introduced myself earlier today, but ko auraki te mauka, ko rekohu te motu, ko moriori me ngai tahu, toku imi, ko Maui Solomon ahau. I feel like a little bit of an imposter here this evening because it was supposed to be Peter Tepani here among this illustrious company, so I'm a late ring-in, right? And I was trying to figure out a way to get out of it. And I was thinking, the last thing Pahia said before we had a break for drinks, he said, you've got to trade up for non-alcoholic, trade down to alcoholic. I got that mixed up, and I traded down. So I limited myself to 6 drinks. So I should be semi-coherent. But I want to acknowledge and greet my whanaunga there, the Reno, tēnā koe hoa. And I first met Reno when he was only a little fella. And this was at the opening, the unveiling of my grandfather's statue, Tāme Hurumanu Rehe, Maui Solomon, the last known moriori of full blood. And Reno's dad, also Reno, was the Rātana minister. And this young little whippersnapper was carting luggage from one place to another at that Te One school. Now look at him, standing up there expounding about the free trade agreement. So anyway, greetings, Renal. But just, a little bit about my background in trade. Started when I was just a young whippersnapper myself in Te Muka, where I grew up, and I was prizing off lead off the top of nails and melting it down and selling it to the local scrapyard to make some pocket money, because there was no such thing as us getting pocket money in those days. I'm one of 15 kids, so you're right. And, raiding the neighbour's walnut tree and cracking the walnuts and drying them and selling them to the local Chinese shop uptown. So I learnt about the art of negotiation and trading at a fairly young age. And then I did a law degree at Canterbury University. Did I say Canterbury? Anyway. And then I ended up trading my legal skills, my legal services. And then I went to Kāhui in 2010, and I was CEO of our tribal trust. So I learnt about sort of establishing businesses in fishing and in tourism and farming and those sorts of things. So, and now, in my early 60s, I put the emphasis on, is I'm now sort of involved in regenerative farming of sheep and cattle, and also my wife and I have set up a nursery and growing and planting. We have 150,000 endemic native trees from Kāhui to plant over the next 3 or 4 years. So if there's any keen planters out there, just talk to me later. And it's actually this last phase of my career is probably the most rewarding, because you're giving back. You're giving back to Papatūnuku, right? And so regenerative farming is about, okay, you can still use the land to generate income, and you can trade your produce, but think about the soil. Think about those trillions and billions of microorganisms in the soil. Don't pump on fertiliser. Don't pump on chemicals. It can self-regenerate, right? And so you don't graze it with an inch of its life. You graze it till about that much, because the more grass you got on, the more grass you're going to grow, right? And if grass is that high above, the roots will be that deep below. So anyway, these are all the things, we've got to think about. It's not just about business as usual. If it's business as usual, waste of time. We're all going to go off that cliff. And this is where Māori and Indigenous people, we are paradigm shifters. And we need to shift the paradigm because it can't be profit at all costs. Papatūnuku and people come before profit.
Kia ora. Ngahiwi, as a young whippersnapper a few years ago, I came into the National Iwi Cheers Forum full of enthusiasm. That got beaten out of me. No. Look, but I came into the Iwi Cheers Forum and, you had led a number of international trade delegations exploring options and opportunities for our people overseas. And the Iwi Cheers Forum has been working on ensuring that iwi rights and interests and voices are heard on a whole range of policy issues. Can you, share with us, an iwi perspective on trade and free trade agreements like the CPTPP?
So, first trip overseas, you see the pictures of our people before that. And there's Hewi and Pat Taylor, there's Paki Harrison, there's Archie Tairo, there's Koro Wetere, there are photos all around the world. There's Tohara Mohi in Hong Kong. And I thought, gee, these people were trendsetters. But when you think back, the Māori battalion shook the battlefields of the world. The Māori sports team shook the sports field of the world. The Māori exhibition shook the cultural fields of the world. So why can't we shake the commercial fields of the world? But not commercial in the sense that we do business as a country, but in the sense that we use our culture and our connection and our whakapapa to introduce ourselves to other countries as a nation of people on our cultural backdrop. We might do commercial, but we also do community. How's your community? All our kaupapa services. And how's your climate? How's the climate affecting you? So the sharing with other nations sort of took it by surprise. Here we are on a trade mission, we're talking environment, we're talking culture, we're talking kura kaupapa and hauora, and we're talking commerce. And that sort of shook the people we were talking to. I said, gee, this is a different proposition. We're not used to talking business, but it culminated in 2020 in Dubai, where the Emiratis saw us as fellow tribesmen and invited us and 16 other Indigenous nations to present at the Global Economic Expo. And usually, Indigenous come and do the haka and karakia at the start, bang the drums in the middle, and do the karakia at the end. This time we participated fully in all the economic discussions. And then the International Events Committee said, we'll never have a Global Economic Expo again without Indigenous people. And so, although we're small, although we're struggling, although we're fighting every inch of the way, we're still leaders in the international scene with other Indigenous. And other Indigenous have answers to environmental issues. We're the best in cultural renaissance and other things. So bringing all the Indigenous together, we can share with the Western world. We can share with the commercial world the values that we hold dear to. We can help the environment, we can help communities, we can help commerce, and then we can help culture. So that has a resonance in China, in America, right throughout the Pacific, up in North Africa, through the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So to me, it's just a natural extension of our whakawhanaungatanga, and trade is just a part of it. The other thing is, though, we need the regulators, our own regulators, to nail it down. So once we cut that inch, there's no reverse gear. Cut another inch, there's no reverse gear. And the discussions we had this morning or today were fantastic in that resolve.
Chris, Te Taumata's been at the forefront of Māori trade policy over recent years, and you've really invested significantly into engaging with our Māori communities, etc. What are the aspirations around trade of those Māori communities that you've been engaging with?
Kapai, I just want to stand up.
Yeah, kapai, all good.
Kapai, Pahia. So I rang Jason yesterday and I said, what do you want us to talk about? And he said, this thing up here, advancing Indigenous self-determination, wellbeing through trade, and can the CPTPP help? So really, I want to use that as a bit of a foundation to answer that question. And what I want to do to answer that question, I want to sort of take a bit of a walk back through my upbringing to the time that I grew up I was raised by my Kro and Kuia on the coast. And what I want to do is walk, because these are the things that shape the way that I think about these issues, which I want to come back and answer that question about CPTPP, which I think is the wrong question, frankly, too. So, and then I want to come back to your point about what Te Taumata's been doing recently, and then I would sort of project that forward in terms of what I think the future might look like. And I do want to acknowledge you, e te hoa rangatira rino, mo tau nei kaha, I pōneke, mo tātou, and you, Mr. Andrews, that are sitting there quietly there for all of the work that you fellows have done. So let me go back to that point. What are the things that shape the way that I think about this issue and therefore lead on to what I think the CPTPP issues are or not? So I was raised by my Krowe and Kuia in a little place called Umaio in Te Whānau Apanui. The only language that was spoken in Te Whānau Apanui at that time when I was growing up was Te Reo Māori. Yeah? Nobody else spoke anything else. We never had to go to school and learn Te Reo Māori. When we grew up on those lands, the key features about that period of time was there was no crime. There was no drug and alcohol abuse. There was there was nothing of those things. They weren't there. The other feature of that time was everybody was working. Everybody was working on these farms. Yeah? So we grew up working hard. Every morning we'd get up and we'd go milk the cows, or we'd go out and be chasing the sheep around or shearing the sheep or making hay with all of the other whānau that were all working alongside us collectively. Yeah? So there was this ethic amongst us as Māori, tūturu Māori, only speaking Te Reo Māori, but we worked hard. And from an very early age, we all knew. So what were we producing? Wool, meat, what else were we producing? Butter. And I knew from a very early age. Where do you think that we were selling those produce to when I was growing up as a kid on the coast? Somebody tell me, where do you think we were growing what were we doing with that was enlivening and enriching our whānau? Somebody tell me, back then, what were we doing with it? It wasn't just going down the road. Where was it going? Yes, we knew from a very, very early age that we were exporting all of that product. We were pooling all of that butter, and it went to a cooperatively owned dairy processing factory that we all owned. We processed it into added value products in those very early ages. So I grew up with this ethic of hard work. I grew up as a tūturu Māori. The only language we spoke was te reo Māori. And whenever there was a tangi on our marae, the tractors used to all come in there, and someone would donate a cow. Someone would bring a pig. Someone would bring some mutton. Other whānau would take off down to the sea, and they'd go diving, and they'd come back with all these mussels and kinas and everything. And it was just all pulled. Yeah? My point is, they were coming off the industry of whānau, doing all of this work and reinvesting all of that wealth back into our communities. Yeah? You look at that same place today. What are the features of Māori communities today? High unemployment, drug and alcohol abuse, pee and meth, all of those bad things are there. And you have to ask yourself, what the hell happened in that intervening period? What happened? Why did we go from full employment, really rich culture, to unemployment, impoverished? I know this is resonating with everybody because it's a fact. What happened? Somebody already answered the question. Our trade channels changed. In their wisdom, the British decided in the 1970s, we're going to cut the ties to New Zealand, and we're going to go and source all of that stuff from Europe. Yeah? And it took about 20 years for all of that stuff to collapse. This is why I make the point that I knew from a very early age, as a Māori, growing up in a Māori community, that trade matters. It really, really enriched our lives. And without that trade, you look at our whānau communities today. You know this stuff. You've been with us in Opotiki. That's why we're doing the things in Opotiki, to try to create industry, that we trade. Yeah? I'm making this point about the role of trade. So, Pahia, you asked a question about the Taumata. When we were formed, we went around the country and we talked to all of our people. We asked them simple questions. Is trade important or not? Universally, what they said to us, trade matters. And they said, because it creates jobs for our people. 1 in 4 jobs in New Zealand is directly derived from international trade. So they then said to us, you fellas go down to Wellington. They also gave us a directive. Carrie was on our board, she knows this, and this is the way that I've driven Te Taumata. They said to us in no uncertain terms, you know how people tell you when you go home at the marae? They speak frankly. They said to us, don't muck around. And they said, don't muck around, muck spelt with an F. Go down there and you fellas make a difference for us. First hui that we had was with Nanaya. So what I said to Nanaya was, Minister, we're not going to waste our time coming down here and sitting in these sterile rooms with all of your officials, having all of this debate, theoretical debate about things. No, we're going to change the game. This was Nanaya's first test, and she passed it. Because I slid across the table to her in Vangelis a list of dates for meetings in the first year, 4 meetings across the country. Yeah? So I said, we're not going to waste our time coming down here. You come and talk chief to chief with our people. Ministers, trade negotiators, all of you guys, Greg, you fellas came. Yeah? Prior to that, none of our Māori people used to turn up at those consultations. None of them. Officials would go around the country and roll out all these things. Nobody turned up. But I knew deep down inside, from the way I grew up, trade matters. It wasn't that they weren't interested why they didn't turn up. They didn't like the government's process. They wanted the government to come out face to face. First hui that we had in Rotorua, Nanaya came to that hui, and a few other ministers, and what was his name? Vangelis, all came to that hui. 80 of our leaders of Māori industry in the Central North Island turned up. The real heavy hitters, the ones that control those Māori balance sheets, all turned up. Active discussion with those trade ministers. Yeah? I want to run this through really, really quickly. We went to Gisborne, over there, and 150 of our people turned up. The big farmers, you know, forestry, fishing, everyone. Even Ming Foon, Ming's in the news at the moment, came along. He was the mayor at the time. They all came along, 150. We then went down to South Island to Waikato. Yeah? There were 300 of our people turned up at that hui. And we had to start rationing spaces for ministers. Too many ministers wanted to come to the hui. Yeah? All of our people were turning out in droves. We then went to the hard place to go. And if there's any Ngāpuhi in the room, I thought, oh, well, we'll leave Ngāpuhi for last because they're going to be the hard ones. We went to Ngāpuhi, great hui. All the heavy hitters of Ngāpuhi were there, Dover Samuel, Shane Jones, Puriti Pene, all there, great hui. My point is this, by changing the model, the way that the government engages with our people turn out in droves. Our people turned out in droves. So where are we today? Reynolds talked about, others have talked about it. We've got these free trade agreements now in place. And we've heard about all of the things that they can deliver for our people. Think back to what I said when I started. We lived rich lives as Māori when we grew up, and because we were all working, because we were trading as a nation with Britain. Now we've got all these other free trade agreements that are starting to unfold. Yeah? And our people are engaging continuously in that space. We've just lived and breathed, Pahia, what our people said. Go down there, don't muck around, and don't muck it up. And be very forceful. And we keep going back to them and talking about everything that's happening. So here's my view about tino rangatiratanga, about self-determination. When I grew up as a kid, that was tino rangatiratanga. We were living it. We were running our own lives. Our culture, our reo was rich. And it was because we were trading. I invite anybody to come back to my community now. You come and meet my whānau, the ones that are living pohara. Because I know there's a direct link between poverty and all of those bad things about us as Māori and trade. So I'm here to strongly say, if we want to talk about tino rangatiratanga, get trade working, but get trade working on Māori terms. And I've heard this view being expressed by different people in this forum. Do it in our own Māori way. And I listen to Ngahiwi. Ngahiwi is right. If we get it working on our terms, and we go and take these products out, our best Māori products around the world, but we do it in a tūturu Māori way, there's premium value in that, in my view, where the consumers of the world will recognise that value and they will stump up and pay a premium. But my point is, so trade matters. That's what our people told us. Go out there and do it in our way. Do not let the government force feed us on a diet of how they think it should be. Be prepared to stand up and say, "Kao, tatari, tātou, let's have a discussion," like we did. Reynolds been to those meetings. He's seen our people turn out. He's seen our people, the hopes and everything that they... So that's my view on that question that you asked me to address around those issues, around tino rangatiratanga. Get trade working, but get trade working on Māori terms. Koina waku nei whakaaro kia tātou, ne? Kia ora no tātou.
Kia ora, kia ora. Maui.
Hi. Hi.
What has been your experience with Indigenous trade, and what's the biggest lesson and insight that you can share with us about that?
That wasn't on the original list of questions.
Hey, we're freestyling. We're freestyling, brother.
All right, no, good. I probably won't answer it anyway. Look, I I'm just picking up on what Chris said. You know, trade, but do it on Māori. Trade, but do it on Māori terms. Well, wait, hold on. And I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with it. Hey, I think that's ultimately what we want to be doing. But trade should not be the end in itself. I suppose is the perspective of Ngā Toki Whakarururanga. And Māori and Polynesians and Indigenous people have been trading for millennia. But I just want to sort of say one thing too, you know, it just doesn't happen overnight that suddenly the Crown is engaging, right? And it didn't happen overnight on the land stuff. It didn't happen on the fisheries. That happened because Māori went to the courts. They went to the Waitangi Tribunal, then they went to the court, and they got injunctions, and they forced the Crown to the table. Let's not be mistaken about what's happened here. We're sitting here because a group of claimants had the kaha to go to the tribunal in 2015 to protest against the TPPA. And then that led to a mediation, that led to an MOU, and then that has ultimately led to Māori having this engagement, having this hui here today. And in fact, when Tane's still in the room? Yeah, Tane's in the room. Someone asked him the question, what's different about the last couple of years? He said, this hui. But this hui wouldn't have happened without that claim in 2015. So, you know, I'm going to get around to your question, Pahia, eventually. My mate Ngahiwi said, keep talking for another 10 minutes because then there'll be time to finish. But, so, yes, you know, I think one of the most important things we can do, not just as Māori but as Indigenous people, is an Indigenous to Indigenous trade. I really believe that, because we share a same philosophical outlook, the same set of values, and trade is a part of it, but it's probably down the line. You know, it's important, but it's not the most important thing. And so I think that, and I use the analogy of waka, all sailing in the same direction. I think that's appropriate to repeat it again, because whether you're Taumata, whether you're Ngā Toki Whakarururanga, Whauma, iwi chairs, whoever you might be, we're all sailing that waka in the same direction, but we might have different destinations. Some might be short-term destinations, some might be medium-term. Ngā Toki Whakarururanga is over the horizon. That's where we're heading. That's where our ancestors headed for when they left Polynesia to come here. So we need to be inspired by that, not be afraid to challenge the status quo. So, yeah, I'm going to wind it up.
So, no. So then, you know, we're talking about lessons learned. What lessons do you think the Crown could then learn from this experience?
The thing is, the kawanga's stuck in their paradigm. That's a paradigm that's been imposed from Britain on Aotearoa New Zealand. And until actually the treaty is fully honoured, there won't be another paradigm. We'll always be playing the game according to a set of colonial rules that have been imposed from the outside. Now that might be the current day reality, but unless we are prepared to challenge it, and we have been challenging it. We've been challenging it for decades. You know, since the Māori Land March in 1974. But we still need to keep engaging with the Crown, and we are, and that's a positive thing. And I just want to acknowledge our mate down there from MFAT and the other people out there. I think we are building really positive relationships, constructive relationships, and it's actually through having these sort of face-to-face kanohi ki te kanohi discussions, I think we can continue to advance the agenda. But I also just want to acknowledge that the Crown, they have, they have constraints too, because the people are talking to on the other side, in other countries, they go, no, we don't want anything to do with that. We get that. But what we say to the Crown is what's in the best interest of Māori is in the best interest of Aotearoa New Zealand. And that's why there needs to be an independent Māori voice at that table, and not filtered through the Crown processes. And that would be a step towards tino rangatiratanga.
Well, I want to probe this, and I'm going to see what Ngahiwi's opinion is of this. The phrase was coined, you know, if it's good for Māori, it's good for New Zealand. Now the problem with that is, well, the problem that I have with that is that if it's good for Māori, it's good for Māori. If it happens to be good for New Zealand, that should be a bonus. It shouldn't be a prerequisite for stuff happening. Your thoughts on that? Do you know? Does it have to be good for the whole of New Zealand for our government to want to do it for Māori?
What's good for Māori is good for the country. What's good for Māori is good for Māori. What's good for Māori is good for the Pacific. What's good for Māori is good for all Indigenous. Because we've got trendsetters in here, and we've got leaders, and we've got people who've had their heads broken fighting the good fight. Now, I've got a few heroes in here tonight. Jane, Kelsey, Mona, and others. Annette, who was here earlier. You know, they've fought the hard battles that our eyes glaze over when it comes to that sort of stuff. And people like them have made the effort, but what it has achieved is that the Treaty of Waitangi is not a handbrake anymore, it's an enabler. And it's a koha that people in this room and others have given to the Indigenous world and given to the Western world to use it as a tool to work with the Indigenous. Because apart from several tribe to crown or tribe to government treaties around the world, the Treaty of Waitangi that gets exactly extracted at the right moment by the right people has become an enabler for other countries to deal with their Indigenous. So what's good for Māori is sort of truck and trailer. We pull everyone behind us. And I'm not being whakahihi about it. We've seen it again on the battlefields, on the cultural fields, and the sporting fields, and now we'll see it in the commercial fields. But it's not just restricted to commercial because it covers all these others. Now the project that Carrie and I are sort of driving at the moment is ara tini. There are many ways to get there. Te tini o ngā ara, kia te tuki pai te kaupapa. And what we've got to not do is trip over each other or leg trip each other or hamstring each other to get there. But everybody has a place in that journey onward from which we have no reverse gear. So with the CPTPP, VCDE, because that's what will end up, we play a pivotal role, not just in helping Māori or New Zealand, but in helping other countries understand their Indigenous better through culture, through climate, through community, and through commerce. And the treaty is an enabler and a koha in that realm.
Chris, how are we going for time, people? What's our time? I want to ask one last question, and I want all of you to give a response to it, and it's not on the paper. But, you know, as a result of our hui over the next couple of days, what would you hope would be a realisable benefit for our mokopuna as a result of what we're doing here over the next couple of days? Chris?
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of key points, and if I can come back to that. Just on the question of what's good for Māori is good for New Zealand, I strongly subscribe to that, but what's good for Māori is, you know, we've got to be careful that we're not just chasing the Western capitalist view of what's good for, and using that as the benchmark as what's good for Māori. No. What's good for Māori is the things that I started off talking about. We grow our people, we grow our reo, we grow our culture, we look after the environment, and we make money. And we make money. So what's good for Māori are all of those things. Rather than us get forced into promoting, like the free trade agreements have been the measure of success of free trade agreements previously has been, Greg, answer the question, GDP, economics. Well, that's not good for Māori on its own. You've got to measure all of these other things. And what I say, Greg, to you and all of your negotiating team, the work that we did together with you guys on the UK FTA, if you go and critically look at all the chapters of those agreements and the EU one, you can break it down into there's environmental issues, there are cultural issues, there are social issues like gender and wahine, all of those things. So they are a type of agreement that is much more encompassing, that is good for Māori as long as you tick all of those boxes. So gone are the days of those old things. So my view, Pahia, about what's good for Māori, as long as it does all of those things, is good for New Zealand. And my view is that the world consumers are now looking for outcomes that tick all of those boxes, that we as Māori have grown up with, ne? We look after our people, we look after the environment, we look after our culture, and we tick off the economics. The world consumers are headed in that direction, is a point that I make. One other point that I'd like to make is that as we've got all of these free trade agreements now coming into play, yeah? We got the UK one, about $1 billion worth of value. We got the EU one that was getting signed off right now. about $1 billion worth of value. Those agreements have become a template for all of the other negotiations that are coming in front of us. So we got embedded into those, the Waitangi Tribunal. We got in their recognition of our reo and our language into those things. So now we're actually rolling that template out. That's certainly the Te Taumata, and there's no hidden agenda here. We're very clear. That's the model that we expect to see in every future agreement, that it's got all of those things embodied. And here's my point. Who watched the news last night? Hipkins was talking to who last night? Don't you answer it, General? Sorry? Yes, Xi Jinping. And what you would have heard about that discussion last night, the only real trade agreement that New Zealand has right now is China, China, and China. Yes? Until we get all of these other things in place. For me, the real game for Māori opened the doors to every market of the world through these FTAs. And then it is our individual farmers, our forestry, our fishing, our honey producers, etc. They then have choice. They're not dependent on China, because you know what can happen. We've got all our eggs in one basket. Or within that, with all of the different chapters in these free trade agreements, different members of our Māori community can pick and say, I'm only interested in that chapter. I'm not interested in all of those other things. I'm only interested in that chapter and that chapter. My point is we give ourselves choice as Māori, and then we as Māori will elect whether or not we want to exercise those options, whereas if we don't have those other options, we've got no choice. We're stuck with one thing. So to me, it's open up all the doors to our Māori people and let them make that choice. Pahia, what was your question? Please?
What's the benefit of the next couple of days that,
Yes.
that would hope be realised for our mokopuna?
Look, I think, like what Maui's just said, in Ngahiwi, I sat here this morning and I listened to the discussion and I listened to Annette, and I was sitting up at the back of the room listening to that, and I said, Tika, I'm listening to them making all these different points, and I'm going, awesome, Annette, completely agree with those points. And I think an awesome outcome from this next couple of days, that we come to some kind of landing on the fundamental things that are important to us all. And as Maui says, different ones of us might go off and promote those in different ways. But if we can land on some fundamental things, we've absolutely supported Ngā Toki because of the Y262. The Y262 is us, all of us. So we've always been very deliberate and careful that never to go out there and cross paths, say, tautoko, that kia kaha koutou. Yeah? So an outcome for me is that we try to consolidate, the different things that we're doing. We might have a short-term horizon, a medium-term horizon, or a longer-term horizon, but we're all heading in the same direction, because I hear that we all are.
Yeah.
Maybe in different ways, different instruments or things. So a good outcome is that we come to some kind of consensus on these things that we're all trying to achieve together.
Ka pai, Maui. Maui.
What he said.
Yeah?
Well, no, seriously, no, but I think we're all heading in the same direction, but we're approaching it from a different perspective. We've all got different destinations, if you will. But we need to have kotahitanga.
Kia ora.
Absolutely crucial. We can't be slagging off at one another because, and excuse me, it's nothing personal, the Crown are experts at divide and rule.
Aye.
Right? We cannot allow us, and let's face it, we argue amongst ourselves all the time.
Aye.
But let's not let the Crown divide and rule.
Koina.
Kia ora.
Tautoko.
Because the kaupapa is too important. And the things that Chris said, there are some fundamental core things we need to agree on and move that forward.
Ka pai.
Tautoko.
Ngahiwi?
We've got a whole generation of kura kaupapa kids.
Awesome.
Kohanga, kura kaupapa, whare kura wānanga, that are now proficient in te reo, me on the tikanga, but they need experiential support. And so in this room is the experiential support. So they don't have to refight the old fights. That they take templates from here, they take advice from here, and they move it on. They don't rehash it. They don't re-debate it. They review it and then move forward. So that's what I'd like to see after here, because we're in the university with fertile minds, with fertile grasp and fertile views of their own future. The other thing, though, last November, the Secretary General of the United Nations said that the world is riven by war, it's battered by climate, it's torn by hate, and it's shamed by poverty, by inequality, and by slavery. And who can take us out of that world? We can. This way of doing it is the new way. There has to be a new way around capitalism. There has to be a new way of combining our efforts, our whakapapa, our tikanga, into showing a new way. So that's probably what I'd like everybody to think about over the next 2 days, that we can lead. We are leaders. You are leaders. And we can work together to achieve it. And then we go to the Crown, and just like a lot of the phrases and strategies we've used in the past, Māori-led, Crown-enabled, rather the other way around. How does Māori fit into this box? Māori-led, Crown-enabled. And we've got the leaders here.
Whoo! Humai te paki. He wakatauki tēnei no ngā mātua tūpuna. He tōtara wāhi rua, he kai nā te ahi. A tōtara split in two is food for the fire. And I think if we've got one common theme that's come out of our three panellists here, is the importance of us uniting, standing shoulder to shoulder and agreeing on what the fundamentals are that we need to agree on so we can progress forward. And so I want to thank all three of you. I found that deeply insightful. Great to see that there are some common threads that exist, amongst the different participants in this space, remembering that we're all on the same team here. And I want to finish, before I just do the closing. Selwyn Parata told me the story when the Te Māori exhibition was over in New York in, was it 1987? Was it 87? Somewhere around here, eh? 85. Jeez, I wasn't even born. What? 1985, and anyway, they'd been talking about Aotearoa. And anyway, this American reporter was interviewing Henare Tūwhāngai from here, Maniapoto. And he said, Mr. Tūwhāngai, he said, well, I've heard the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori people, referring to New Zealand by another name. They call it ow. And he goes, yes, we call it owls. Hey, when you sit there and you look at just how sharp those people were, yes, we call it owls. Well, that is a pipe dream because it's not ours, and I don't want to get you all excited. But look, what an awesome finish to the day. Just to let you all know, and again, thank you all, for your participation here today. Tomorrow is where the rubber hits the road, and we go into workshops and we start to actually drill down and identify, okay, what are the fundamental important things that we collectively agree on that we're going to be putting on the table for consideration.